John always wanted to be invisible, to disappear from the world and live his life in solitude. But he never imagined that one day his wish would actually come true. It started with a strange feeling, like a tingling sensation all over his body. He thought it was just a passing sensation, but it turned out to be something much more sinister. He started to notice that people around him were ignoring him, not even looking in his direction. At first he thought it was some kind of prank, but soon realized that he had become invisible. At first, John was elated. He could go anywhere he wanted without being noticed. He could listen in on conversations and watch people without them knowing. But as the days passed, he realized that his newfound power came with a terrible price. He watched as his wife and children went about their daily lives, oblivious to his presence. He followed them everywhere, but they never acknowledged him. He tried to talk to them, but his voice was unheard, his touch unfelt. As time went on, John became more and more isolated. He watched as his friends and colleagues forgot about him, as if he had never existed. He tried to reach out to them, but his efforts were in vain. The loneliness was unbearable. John spent his days wandering the streets, hoping for a glimpse of someone who would see him, but no one did. He was truly alone. As the months passed, John's mind began to unravel. He started to hear voices, whispers in the darkness. He saw things that weren't there, and he began to fear for his sanity. One day, as he was wandering through the city, he heard a familiar voice. It was his wife, calling out his name. He turned around, but she was nowhere to be seen. He followed the sound of her voice, desperate for any kind of contact. But the voice led him to an abandoned building, dark and foreboding. John hesitated, but his desperation overpowered his fear. He entered the building, his heart racing. John was trapped in the darkness, surrounded by the whispers of the forgotten. He felt a chill run down his spine, and he knew that he was in grave danger.
John, can you hear me?
John tried to respond, but his voice was weak and barely audible. "I'm here," he said, his heart racing with hope. His wife's hand reached out and touched his shoulder. He felt her warmth, her presence, and it was like a ray of light in the darkness. Slowly, she guided him out of the darkness and into the light. As they emerged into the daylight, John looked around and saw that he was surrounded by the people he had once known. They were all staring at him in disbelief, shock, and wonder. "I'm here," he said again, his voice stronger this time. His wife hugged him tightly, tears streaming down her face.
I never forgot about you.
The people around him began to approach him, asking him questions, touching him, trying to understand what had happened to him. John was overwhelmed with emotion, and he could feel his power waning. He was no longer invisible. From that day forward, John lived his life differently. He knew that he had been given a second chance, and he was determined to make the most of it. He became more present, more engaged with the people around him, and he never forgot what it was like to be forgotten. Years later, when he was an old man, John would tell the story of his invisible days to his grandchildren. They would listen in awe, and they would never forget the lesson that he taught them, that the power of presence is one of the most valuable things we have.